In today's lesson, we are going to cover day 2 of the Crusades. Yesterday we covered the reasons behind the Crusades, that it was over the Holy Land and to open up the trade routes and to defeat the Turks. We also discussed that it was between Christians and Muslims and that it was a holy war as well to regain the Holy Land, the east of the Mediterranean Sea, the Jerusalem area of the world. Today we're going to talk about the events that happened in the Crusade itself. We're going to talk about the battles, we're going to talk about key players, we're going to talk about the results and what happened after the Crusades. So, let's start with the battles. There were 3 main Crusades. There were more, but there were 3 main ones that we're going to talk about today. The first Crusade happened around 1096 to 1099 AD. The European peasant army, which was made up of primarily peasants, lower class, invaded the Holy Land. They were untrained, they lacked military equipment. Because of this, many peasants were killed by the Muslim Turks. When Europeans find out that the peasants were killed by the Muslim Turks, they send in the knights afterwards. Knights go in, they end up beating the Muslim Turks, and the Christians, or the European Christians, win the first Crusade. But that does not end the Crusades. One battle did not end it. The second Crusade happens. It happens roughly about 45 years after, 1147 to 1149 AD. After the winning the first Crusade, most Christians go home. They go back to their homeland, go back to their farm. As a result of this action, that most of them go back home, the Turks take back the Holy Land with little resistance. The King of France and the Emperor of Germany send troops to stop the Turks from regaining more of this land. Saladin is the leader of the Turks. He ends up defeating this group that France and Germany sends, and he defeats them. So it is 1-to-1 Christians or European Christians to Muslim Turks. The third Crusade. It is Saladin versus the English King Richard the Lionheart. In 1192, the two sides come to a truce. English King Richard the Lionheart and Saladin come to a truce, an agreement. They say the Holy Land stays in Muslim hands. In return, unarmed Christians could visit the Holy Land. Trade routes are now open back up. Unarmed Christians could pilgrim there to the Holy Land, and there was now an opportunity to mend this relationship between the Muslims, or the Muslim Turks, and the European Christians again. Okay, so what happens as a result of the Crusades? There were 3, but it really has to do with the events that happened after the Crusades. I have come up with a phrase to help you remember. If Turks traveled, they would trade. Let's repeat it again. If Turks traveled, they would trade. Each of these words, if Turks traveled, trade, each word means something, or is a result of the Crusade. Let's start with the I in if. I means improvements. Improvements in ships, improvements in maps, improvements in exploration and explorers. People began to go to other areas of the world because they saw that there is more open than just the continent of Europe. We also move on to feudalism, the F in if. Feudalism begins to decline. As we talked about earlier in the unit, feudalism was a large part of the Middle Ages, but because of the Crusades, feudalism begins to decline. Lords begin to die off or spend too much money on the military, and it just begins to collapse. T in Turks. Turks still rule the Holy Land. That's an easy one. T, in travel. Europeans want to travel more. They see that there's more out there in the world than just their European continent. There's more land, more people, more opportunities. T, in trade. Europeans found new items in the Crusades and began to trade with these new areas. Such items as silk, spices, sugar, and cotton. Okay, brand new items. The Crusade is one of the first steps in leading to the Exploration era, which we'll wrap up the year with in a few weeks. Okay, this is really the first step in leading to it. So today we have talked about the main battles. There were three. The two sides, the Christians and the Muslim Turks, end in a truce. The Muslims regain the Holy Land or take the Holy Land. Christians can continue to visit the Holy Land unarmed. Saladin versus Richard the Lionheart are the two players. Remember the results. If Turks traveled, they would trade. This ends the Crusades lessons for today.